Hi, everyone. I'm Ivo Daalder, President of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and this is World Review, our weekly roundup of the world's news. And joining us this week is Carol Giacomo, former diplomatic correspondent of Reuters and editorial member of the editorial page of the New York Times. Carol, wonderful to have you. Also with us, Carla Anne Robbins, formerly of the New York Times editorial page, longtime journalist at the Wall Street Journal, and now an adjunct fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Carla, great to have you as well. And from over across the ocean, Giles Whittell, who is the World Affairs editor at Tortoise Media, formerly of the London Times, including reporting from Washington. Giles, wonderful to have you as well. So here we go, a week plus after the truly momentous events in Washington with the sacking of the Capitol, and within a week, the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump for the second time in history, with the largest bipartisan vote ever, although note 10 members of the Republican caucus represents only 5% of the Republican members who voted to impeach. We won't talk about the domestic politics because, Carol, that's for other shows and for other places. But what strikes you about the impact of this on America's standing in the world and about American foreign policy? Carol, you're muted.
Technology is such a complicated thing. Anyway, from the moment that he was elected, Biden was facing the toughest political environment of any modern president. But since January 6th, when Trump incited the violent mob of supporters to storm the Capitol and try to overturn the November election, Biden's challenges have become vastly more difficult. First of all, we have to make sure that the transfer of power goes forward safely. Plans for Biden to be sworn in at the Capitol, outside the Capitol on January 20th are going ahead, and officials say they are confident he can be protected. But they've had to deploy thousands of National Guard troops to Washington and cordon off large swaths of the area around the Capitol to ensure that happens. The area looks like an armed camp, besmirching the traditional image of Inauguration Day as a peaceful democratic transfer of power. Some experts think the event should actually be moved inside for safety, or that Kamala Harris, the vice president, should be sworn in separately in a more secure location, and that other key officials in the line of succession, the House Speaker and the Senate President pro tem, should not be on the grandstand when Biden is sworn in. They feel the extra caution is necessary, not just because of continued threats from white nationalists and other extremists, but also because of concerns that some lawmakers actually abetted the mob last week, and that there are rising extremist sentiments in the military and in law enforcement. This is just, you can't overstate how extraordinary this is for America. In one display of the concern, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the top military leaders of the country, issued a letter last week to the troops, basically reminding them of their constitutional responsibilities. And the question is, would Trump try to call out the military in order to stay in power? And the other transfer of power issue that we have to be concerned about is confirming the cabinet secretaries that will help Biden run the government. The Senate Republicans and Democratic leaders are now in negotiations to figure out how they can, and if they can, simultaneously go forward with Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate and also do the confirmation. In terms of foreign policy per se, the insurrection and the impeachment of Trump has exposed American democracy as weaker and more troubled than most people thought. New polls show that while 74% of Americans say democracy is under threat, the vast majority of Republicans still approve of the job that Trump is doing. And reporting shows that there remains a large swath of Americans who remain steep in conspiracy theories and an alternate reality. Like many Americans, Democratic allies overseas are shaken by the enormity of what's happened, which was basically a terrorist strike at the heart of American democracy from within. And some now question America's reliability as a partner. Adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran see last week's events as more evidence of America and American power in decline. The country's international standing had already taken a huge hit under Trump over 4 years. And while Biden has pledged to reassert a principled and constructive leadership, erasing the negative perceptions and reality of what's happened in the Trump years will be now even harder than before.
Giles, I'm sure that the BBC and ITV and whatever images you have on TV showing what was now called the green zone of Washington, D.C., which is, of course, a word we associate with Iraq, where there was a green zone in the immediate aftermath and continues today of the Iraq War. What's the perception of what's happening to the United States and its impact on the ability of the U.S., which for 75 years, like it or not, has been this dominant global leader, used to be called the leader of the free world. How does that, from a gut reaction, what does that do to America's ability to get stuff done, even with the change of administration?
Okay, great question. And my short answer is it impacts it. And if I can bring any value to the discussion from where I'm sitting, it impacts it less than you guys fear, less than it seems when you're right close to ground zero. Mm-hmm. Caveat, I'm really aware as a reporter, or sometimes still a reporter, that if you're not close to ground zero, forgive me for using that phrase, I know it's been emotive ever since 9/11, you don't know the details, and the details as they've emerged are all more troubling than you might expect. You know, weapons found, weapons intended to be used, plans for assassination, what were they really going to use the plastic cuffs for, that type of thing. But as an observer from outside, and someone who I reported from the States for a total of 8 years, I've never at any point worried about the basic resilience of American democracy. I was reminded, I'd just say a couple of things. I was reminded of Apollo 13. I felt that before the insurrection, you had an Apollo 13, or that the basis for an Apollo 13 moment, Gene Kranz saying to his supervisor in mission control, "Sir, with respect, I don't think this is going to be the worst moment in NASA's history, but the best." Because just before the insurrection, you'd had Mike Pence and Mitch McConnell finally, admittedly much too late, but finally saying exactly the right things to get the process moving to neutralize this crazy threat from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. And that seemed like a moment of incredible strength and resilience for American democracy. I just say, I agree entirely with Carol. In the short term, this undermines America's ability, for example, to lecture China on democracy. Obviously, China and Hong Kong have since then turned around on a dime, running very disingenuously parallel videos of last year's pro-democracy protests, which did turn violent sometimes in Hong Kong, alongside Washington last week. But I think from an external perspective, the really interesting question going forward is, what does this do to the Republican Party? Does it split the Republican Party? Because if the answer is no, you still have the crazies inside the party and the likelihood of a very strong Trumpist candidate nominee 2024. If the answer is yes, then it's possible. Anything's possible. You could move to a sort of French-German model in which, yes, you have the hard right with their own power base, but you also arguably have much more of a recipe for stable centrist government.
So, Carla, what Giles started off with is what I have heard as well from my friends overseas, in some ways making the case that, yes, this was a scary and moment, but the Republic stands. People voted in larger numbers than they ever did. The votes were counted. They were certified. The Congress did the certification, and the president, the right president, will be the winner. That is to say, of the election will be inaugurated. And isn't that? And the courts held up too. So in a sense, the strength of democracy is also demonstrated. So talk a little bit about that, but also, other things that happened. And in particular, I know you're interested in this phone call that the Speaker of the House made to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the midst of the turmoil in the Capitol, and what it says about, what happens to government when it is under attack.
So there are several things there, of course. One is, I truly want to believe in the resilience of American democracy. And I think the lesson of the last 4 years has been, one, how powerful a president is, and that our institutions are not as strong as we thought. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is that there are a hell of a lot of people who are living in an alternate reality. When you see the polls again and again of the number of people who seem to believe, I thought it was like a yay team thing, that, that you see the 70% of Republicans who said they think that Joe Biden wasn't legitimately elected and that it was just sort of a tribal response. But then you see what happened on the Hill, then you start thinking, maybe people really believe this. But what I found, probably the two most chilling things that I've seen, one was the memo that Carol referred to, from the Joint Chiefs, and they sent that memo, that statement out to the troops without even going through the civilian leadership, which is an extraordinary thing for them to do. And they did it because they clearly were really, really scared. And so as much as I want to believe in the resiliency of the institutions, and one of the most fundamental things of the resilience of our institutions is civilian control of the military. If they were that scared that they didn't even trust the Trump civilian control of the military, that they felt they had to do it, that A, they didn't trust the people over them, and B, they weren't really sure about the people under them, that we may really have a more profound problem than I wanted to believe. That's the first thing. The second thing is, why I've been obsessed with the Nancy Pelosi phone call to the chairman, to Milley, is that from a continuity of government point of view, I understand she was scared that Trump was going to do something, or may still do something really crazy between now and the 20th. The man does have control of nuclear weapons. He does have control of, of the Pentagon. And basically what she was saying to Milley, to the chairman, was, can he drop a nuclear weapon? Can you, stand up to him? Can you tell him you're not going to do it because it's illegal? The Pentagon, the spokesman for the chairman said, yeah, the conversation took place and it was an informational conversation. I could understand why she was scared. The fact that she publicized that was really a bad idea. She told her caucus about it. But what was the message that she was sending to our adversaries who might decide to do it? The message was that we are, who's in charge? That we don't trust that a woman who is in the direct line of succession, who doesn't trust the president, isn't really sure about the military, isn't really sure about civilian control. These go to really profound questions, not only of continuity of government, but civilian control of the military. These are the fundamental things about American institutions of what makes our democracy so strong. So yay, I want to believe that what we are and who we are is still intact, that a majority of Americans voted for Joe Biden because they wanted to get back to American leadership, that they wanted to unify. But those two events really made me frightened.
So Carol, how put yourself in the position of Biden or one of the people coming in. How do you reassure, take the positive of what has happened in terms of the resilience of the institutions that we just talked about? What steps do you take to reassure Americans as well as folks abroad that we're back to a more normal way of being a democracy and of course, having the civilian control over the military and the kinds of institutional checks and balances that that for 200 plus years have marked this form of government.
Okay, I'm first, before I get to that, I just want to say, I hear what Giles says about being, optimistic about American democracy. To my mind, the Europeans, every European leader that I've spoken to in the last 4 years has been more optimistic than I was about Trump and what would be the result of Trump. And I feel that their optimism has proven to be so pie in the sky. When you're an American sitting here watching things happen that you never, ever, ever thought could ever happen in your country. And when you say, okay, yes, democracy has prevailed at the moment, but we are on a knife edge. There have been, moments when, we're not talking about big margins here. We're talking about, we're lucky that these courts, one by one, reaffirmed the validity of vote and that sort of stuff. So I am really seized with how perilous a moment we are in. Okay, so what does Biden do? Biden does a lot of what he's doing. He is going forward with, he is being the president. He is speaking out on moving forward to address the threats that we're facing now, starting with COVID, starting with economic, the economic situation, reaching out to allies, saying, I am trying to unify the country, appealing to the people who, if they're not on the fringes, then they're the vast middle of America, and saying, I am your leader and I'm going to represent you all. And he's in place experienced people who are respected in their fields. And I think that's how you do it. And they're going to reach out to allies. I mean, he's appointed people who have made their career, working with American allies and being progressive, responsible stewards of American policy. So I think he's already on the right track on that.
Carla, first 100 days is always a mark point for the president. As Carol says, the COVID situation, which of course is a global situation, but has huge ramifications here at home. The economic situation is going to be priority one. I think quite remarkably, the president-elect is doing a series of speeches you would expect the president to do rather than the president-elect to do, but he's making his point. On the foreign policy point, though, however, certainly Biden comes in thinking that foreign policy has been a problem for 4 years, and there's a lot of rebuilding to be done. What do you expect to come out of it, and what do you see in the team that he's put together as indicators of where this is going to go?
Well, listen, I think, hands down, in the first 100 days, he's got to get COVID under control, and that's going to have, his whole credibility at home, but also his credibility internationally is intrinsic to that. And you can see that he's nervous about it. I mean, that you see even the reports that are coming out today that they haven't gotten access to the information from the Trump administration to hit the ground running the way they wanted to. And he's made a really big promise here, which, with the 100 million shots, 100 days. And the world is watching, because one of the basic things, not just our democracy, but it's our notion of competence that has been taken such an enormous hit in this. So people will be watching that. Now, in terms of foreign policy priorities, and keeping in mind, he's always thought of himself as a foreign policy president. I've never been a huge fan of Biden's foreign policy, but thank God he's going to be coming in. He's got to extend New START, the last remaining nuclear arms control agreement. He's got 2 weeks, 15 days after the inauguration. Then he's got to figure out the rest of the Russia relationship, in particular, how to respond to this massive Russia hack. Ivo, we were talking about this the other day. He talked really tough on it, but there's got to be a really serious conversation in here about whether this really is just espionage. So he's got to deal with that. easy step to show his commitment to global governance and to something that a lot of people who voted for him and that the planet really needs, is he's going to rejoin Paris. He's got John Kerry there to do it, and that's will be less of a bandwidth issue because you're going to have a big name out there globally. It's a big policy domestically. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's really an important thing to do. So we'll see whether they have the bandwidth to do it, but certainly you're going to have Kerry to be carrying that flag. Made a big China pledge to work closely with allies to address trade and technology and a lot of other problems out there, as well as the military things. Europeans said all along they wanted to work with us, and then they went and EU went and signed this trade deal, even though the Biden people did something extraordinary, which is said, please don't do this. And Europeans went ahead to do it anyway. So we'll see how that one plays out. You know, when Biden is committed to this democracy summit, which I find really, really interesting, I think it's absolutely essential to deal with the fact that Trump has been enabling authoritarians for the last 4 years, that if you don't have the United States as an offshore balancer on the democracy issues, you see what ends up happening. On the other hand, I think this is turning into the wedding from hell. You know, the whole question about who gets invited, who doesn't get invited. You know, do you invite the Brazilians? I don't think they're really on their way to being a democracy. You don't invite the Brazilians? What ends up happening? Do the Brazilians then go to the party with the Russians? Do you invite the Turks? Invite the Turks? This is one of these things that looked like a really great idea when they announced it. Supposed to be one of his big early commitments. I think maybe they do a really good job if they forgot that one and figure out other ways to shore up democracy through relationships through NATO, through the relations with the EU, through lots of other institutions. Committed to reviving the Iran nuclear deal. The Iranians are going to have to do a lot to give up their 20% enriched uranium, but you got a lot of people in the administration who are committed to that one, who cut that deal. And finally, North Korea, the words which they never speak. And the North Koreans are having a hissy fit. The last thing you want to do, baby does not like to be put in a corner. And they cannot talk about North Korea because they don't want to think about North Korea. North Korea is not going to let them not be thought about.
Giles, you're sitting across the ocean. What do you think Europe and the world wants from the United States at this point, and to what extent do you think it will get what it wants?
It wants a really dramatic day one. I'll get that. There's a long list of stuff that he can do on day one, and he will, and that'll have, as I've said on these calls before, actual as well as symbolic importance, I think. Rejoining the WHO, rejoining Paris, stopping building that crazy wall, ending the ban on travel from mainly Muslim countries. That'll send a tremendous signal that pragmatism, common sense, civilization is back. I would hope also, just picking up on what Carla was saying, that actually between them they do find a plausible way of hosting a democracy summit. I think your characterization of the back channel gossip about invites is great, and I'm sure that'd happen. I don't know if you could have a democracies within G20 format, or if you could build on some institution that already exists, but the pasting that democracy as a concept has taken over the past 4 years, I think requires something very dramatic beyond simply juicing up NATO, for example, on which, final point, his manifesto, as we call it over here, his campaign platform, calls for reimagining these kinds of alliances. And I think a really interesting question, especially in light of the hack that you mentioned, is, does a cyber attack become formally the type of attack that can trigger Article 5 mutual defense? A lot will depend on what becomes known about the hack, whether it originates from GRU, military intelligence, whether it can be regarded as a military offensive of some kind, but also a lot will depend on NATO partners' appetite for getting back together after taking such a beating from Trump. But just final point, remember that extraordinary clip of Trump barging to the front. I believe it.
Yes.
What?
With the Montenegrin, yes.
Right. That was a NATO summit, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
it was, yes.
Yeah. So, and look, I accept Carol's point that I'm probably far too Pollyanna-ish about your country, which
But we love it. We love it, Giles. Tell us more.
Well, I
want to believe.
We do want to believe.
a U.S. citizens, but I do think that the rest of the world has great confidence that then when that absurd individual steps aside and is replaced by someone we recognize as, let's face it, a somewhat boring but conventional leader, we will all heave a huge sigh of relief, and you'll go on hearing that for years.
Mm-hmm.
Just two comments, and then Carol jump in here as well on this democracy piece. The interesting thing that people have, I think, missed is that he's calling for a summit for democracy, not a summit of democracies. And that actually makes it a little easier to think about it. Who do you want there? You're going to talk about the issues that are important for democracies, to strengthen and uphold democracy. So you could actually invite people who are backsliding as a means to have a discussion about how you can move this forward. So it's an interesting concept, by the way, particularly since the United States seems to have been backsliding when it comes to democracy itself, and it might be part of a domestic as well as foreign way to renew it. The other thing, Giles, just specifically to you, of course, your prime minister is proposing a new format. The so-called D10, and which is the G7 plus Australia, South Korea, and India to come together as part of the. He's invited those three countries to be part of the G7 meeting that the UK will host as president. And so there may be a core group of strong European, Asian, and North American democracies. India is an interesting player in that piece, but it seems to be that there's movement, at least in 10 Downing Street, to take this concept forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's. Sorry, Carla, go ahead.
I was just wanted to ask a question of Ivo, Carol, and Giles, who may know the answer to this, but with the Brits hosting the G7 or G10, and at the same time talking about cutting back on foreign aid. I mean, one of the really big questions that's out here right now is this incredible inequality of access to vaccines, which could lead to huge amounts of displacement and resentment in the world. I mean, we can't get back to the world to normalcy if a good part of the world, people can't travel, people can't, I mean, there's going to be a huge disparity in economic recovery, huge disparity in health recovery that's going on there. And this is the sort of thing that when Tony Blair was out there, he was talking about, this is what you guys actually, pioneered in the old days of G7 meetings. Mm-hmm. Is there any discussion of what the topic is going to be for the G7 meeting, of dealing with this fundamental global disparity on recovery?
In London, not that I'm aware of. I mean, we'll get onto this, but the COVID/vaccination conversation is a bit like where you are, entirely UK based at the moment. I mean, we try to host conversations, and other news organizations do, and think tanks, about how to inoculate according to need rather than means. But the national political conversation is all about vaccinating as many people in the UK as quickly as possible, rather than how can the UK seize this moment to lead, to take on a broader global leadership role in an enlightened way. We're not at that point.
We'll come back to the vaccine COVID piece in a second. I just want to give Carol an opportunity to jump in here.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this democracy summit thing, which in concept, I think it is a good idea. The fact that I'm thinking, because I'm seized with this in particular, Hungary and Poland. I mean, members of NATO who are remain members of NATO, remain members of the EU, and derive benefits from both organizations, which were supposed to be alliances of democratic countries, are really thumbing their noses at that concept and backsliding in a serious way. And so I do think we need to reinforce that internationally. But and Ivo may afflict at this. It would be good for Biden to start at home. I do think there is a need for some kind of national recommitment to democratic institutions and reforms to strengthen the democratic pieces of our system that have shown such strain and inability to really meet the challenge of the moment. Bruce Jentleson and Jim Goldgeier wrote a piece in Foreign Affairs in which they had called for basically a democracy summit at home. And I think that's a smart idea. So that's...
Yeah, no, I by the way, my column today in the Chicago Tribune makes this exactly the same point, that if you want to, but you have to do both. That is,
you have to do both.
You have to do the international, but you have to start at home, because restoring faith in democracy is not just an American, it's a global project, and we all need to be part of it. But restoring faith in government, Giles, let me come to you and talk about COVID. Carla mentioned that competency was one of the issues that was exposed in our own country. It is true in yours as well, where the virus really has torn through the fabric of society, and you are the first one to have discovered and then lived with and understood what happens when a virus mutates and it spreads more rapidly in the country. You're also the first one to start vaccination and to roll out large numbers of vaccines at the same time. And there seems to be this deliberate strategy that through vaccination is how we get control. Talk a little bit about where we are in this, almost it's more than a year since COVID first appeared on the international scene. I think it was January 13th that Thailand discovered the presence of COVID or of the virus on their soil. Where we are and what the strategy now is in Britain.
Right. Well, you call it a deliberate strategy, and it is, but it's a strategy that's been forced on this government by the incompetence that you referred to earlier. Thankfully, coming to you from Plague Island, that there is one exception to that incompetence, and that is the UK has surprised itself by doing a decent job of acquiring vaccines created both domestically and elsewhere. But very briefly, where are we now, especially as a result of this Kent strain, the mutation that emerged in southeast England? Late autumn, something similar emerged in South Africa, in Durban. There was a to and fro between academics in hospitals in South Africa and the UK. In December, public health people here realized that this variant had been circulating since September and was already out of control. And the broad figure that we've been given is that it's the R number, the reproduction number is 1.7. It's substantially more transmissible than the strain that we've all had to get used to. And it has put the UK in a position just last week, day after day, 50,000 new infections. 48 hours ago, the highest number of deaths recorded in a single day in the entire pandemic, more than 1,500, which I think the US equivalent would have been 9,000 deaths in a day. Fortunately for us, coming back to the point about vaccines, the UK is now vaccinating at the second fastest rate in the world. More than 3 million people have been vaccinated. And what we hear from the minister in charge of vaccination in the UK is that they're actually pretty confident that they will reach a target of 15 million people That's the 4 most vulnerable categories vaccinated by the middle of next month. And then what's new in the last 24 hours is a claim which really does bespeak more confidence than we thought this government had about anything, that a much larger proportion will be, nearly half the population will have been offered a vaccine by the middle of March. So we're not at Israeli levels, which are achieved with an extraordinarily competent health system in which 4 state regulated insurers compete with each other. And as I understand it, they've paid a fairly hefty premium for their supply. But in this respect only, the UK is in a good place. But in the meantime, of course, the Kent strain has been distributed to more than 40 other countries. So, we find ourselves more isolated than ever. There's Brexit and there's this. Countries all around the world shutting their doors quite literally to travel from the UK. And the rest of the world, including your country, is very likely headed into a similar race between the variant and the vaccine, in which all other mechanisms are simply not up to it. I mean, what we have found, and this is largely through incompetence, is that test and trace has always come too little and too late. Social distancing and lockdown has worked, but only when absolute, when prioritized in absolute terms over the economy. But that too late. So we see and feel partly responsible for the sort of stresses that we're feeling now being distributed around the world. I read in Politico this week about Biden apparently giving the US vaccine czar a dressing down in front of colleagues, the target of 100 million doses in 100 days already looking extremely hard to meet, that the slow rollout of the vaccine in France is already a national scandal. With any luck, the best that can be said is that these are the darkest days.
Carla, these are the darkest days. I mean, there's a lot, of course, we haven't spent a lot in the public debate about COVID, given everything else that has been happening, although it now looks like that the members of Congress who were hiding from the marauding hordes may have been part of a super spreader event themselves. Vaccine rollout has, let's put it charitably, not gone as well as one would have hoped. Even 100 million doses in 100 days gets you to 50 million people because it's 2 dosage per person. That is about 1/7 of the population. Think at the same time about the possibility of the same strain mutating and spreading here in the United States that is in the UK, has now also overtaken Ireland. And the incredible exponential growth that you see when our hospitals are already full and we're running out of supplies. It doesn't look like we're going to have an easy couple of months.
Well, I will tell you, I mean, I because I'm digitally competent and because New York, changed the rules so that if you're 65 plus, that you could sign up for. So I was very proud after spending an hour and a half that I managed to sign up for vaccine, both for me and for my husband. And my daughter, as we were speaking, just texted me the news that my appointment was canceled because Mount Sinai has run out of vaccines. And so there you have it. It's now, am I a person? I am luckily not in a particularly high risk group, so I will be hiding out indefinitely, like everybody else who is hiding out indefinitely. This is just, and then I think about all the other people who are not digitally competent, not English speakers. I mean, it is chaos out here. It is chaos here as it is chaos every place else. I mean, the Biden people are up against an extraordinary challenge here. And the number one thing that he can do to establish the perception of competence and to calm things down is to try to get those shots in people's arms in a short period of time. It is the negligence of the Trump administration is so transcendent, and the spitefulness that they did not allow, access to the information in the transition is absolutely an extraordinary thing, but it is an extraordinary thing of one of thousands of extraordinary things that have gone wrong here. One hopes, I mean, the political piece that Giles was talking about, one hopes that this is, I think the name is Zients, who was the one who came in after the epic fail of healthcare.gov and the Obama administration, that these people know how to pull back from epic fails. And, you know, will the people be happy if they do 85 million in that time period? Probably. I would, you know, be a hell of a lot better than what we've done so far. But this is an enormous challenge, because it's not just people's lives, it's the economy, it's everything that's here. But right now, you know, there's just absolutely no sign that they have gotten any of the support they need to make this transition. But I'm not saying much that anyone doesn't already know. It's just absolutely extraordinary chaos right now.
Yeah.
Carol.
Go ahead.
No, please go.
Well, no, I mean, I can't really add anything terribly original. I mean, you've got some evidence that big companies like Disneyland apparently was opening its parking lot to give shots. So there seems to be a willingness on unusual parties to be cooperative if there were you know, a leadership to marshal everybody to help out. Certainly Biden has been talking about this for a long time and working on it. Our expectation is that he will be able to certainly do a better job. But you know, if they can't get the information from the Trump administration until the very last minute when they take over government, it leaves them behind the curve. It's cruel. It's really cruel.
Well, Biden was necessary, but they were clearly, there was apparently quite a debate within the transition about whether they were going to keep on the head of Operation Warp Speed, and they made the decision not to, and they're putting Kessler, the former head, in charge. So clearly they've decided that, you know, having sort of previous memory is not, you know, it's not helping them, and they're just going for a total break. Now, I don't know whether that's the right choice or not, but clearly they're going for a total break.
It does strike me, and that in order to do this well, and you can learn from Israel, and I think you can learn from Britain as well. There's two things you really need besides guaranteed supply. One is you need a central strategy that is top down, and it goes from production to distribution to delivery into the arms from a central perspective. Of course, that didn't happen. It was to bring them to the states, and the states had to figure out how to do this. And then secondly, and this is where I think I worry even more about in the US, you have to decide who is going to get this. And we have now just said that anybody over 65 can get this. Well, you know, but the people who really need it, frankly, aren't on this screen. We all are able to do our jobs and have what we need from home. It's the people, and so one would hope a bit of strategy there, and it'd be strange, but maybe not such a bad idea of the Biden folks to talk not only to people in Israel, but maybe to people in London about how this can be done. Giles, I'm going to give you the last word before we close out. You're on mute, Giles.
Apologies, I dropped off. There's one other interesting lesson in the world. Indonesia. They have gone for a policy of vaccinating the frontline workers and young working adults first, in the confidence that more vulnerable older people will be able to go on shielding themselves. It's interesting to see how that turns out. Finally, there is anxiety and muttering over here that people find out how many doses the UK ordered, and that other countries will then start putting pressure on suppliers to prioritize them over places like the UK. The numbers are more than 300 million doses ordered by the UK for a population of 68 million. The government over here would prefer that was not broadcast, but there is going to have to be, in addition to the 2 points you made, more equitable global distribution.
Absolutely. Giles, Carla, Carol, thanks so much for a really at times depressing, but also a forward-looking and uplifting discussion. I wish you all a happy weekend. It's Martin Luther King Day here on Monday, an important day in our history to remember the sacrifices of so many and the struggles that are ongoing. It is also National Service Day in the United States, part of the inaugural week. And so I wish all of our listeners here in the United States and folks drawing a wonderful Martin Luther King Day. Go out and serve your communities as a step. And in the meantime, I wish all of you a very happy and great weekend, and see you all back a week on World Review to discuss next week's world news. Thank you all.
Thanks, Ivo.
Thanks,
Thank
Ivo.
you.